Jack Calloway had been driving trucks for over 20 years, but the loneliness of the highway still gnawed at him sometimes. He had seen things out here, things he didn't like to talk about, accidents that made no sense, towns that seemed to appear and disappear overnight, people standing on the roadside where no people should be. Tonight was one of those nights. The radio crackled as he steered his 18-wheeler down a desolate stretch of highway. The moon was a pale sliver in the sky, barely enough to light the road. His cargo, he didn't even know what it was this time, rattled in the trailer behind him. Some last-minute, high-priority job. The dispatcher hadn't given him details, just instructions: don't stop. Stay on Route 54 until you reach the drop point. Easy enough. But as the hours crawled by, the darkness around him felt heavier, thicker. His headlights barely cut through the gloom. There were no other cars, no streetlights, just the endless black ribbon of asphalt stretching ahead. Then, up ahead, something moved. Jack eased off the gas. A figure stood on the shoulder of the road, barely visible in the dim glow of his high beams. A man, or at least something shaped like one. The stranger raised a hand in a slow wave. Jack's gut told him to keep driving, but something about the man's posture, his head slightly tilted, his stance too still, made his skin crawl. He passed by without stopping. In the rearview mirror, the figure remained standing in the same place, untouched by the wind of the passing truck. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. A cold sweat formed at the base of his neck. He turned his eyes back to the road, and nearly slammed the brakes. The hitchhiker was now standing directly in front of him. Jack swerved, his tires screeching against the pavement. His truck shuddered, barely avoiding the figure. His heart pounded as he checked the mirrors again. The road was empty. Shit! He rubbed his eyes. Fatigue. That's all it was. He needed coffee. A rest stop. Something to shake the creeping unease. A mile later, he spotted a diner, its neon sign flickering. Maggie's 24-hour diner. He pulled into the lot, cut the engine, and climbed out, stretching his stiff legs. Inside, the place was nearly empty. A waitress with tired eyes poured him coffee without asking. He glanced at the only other patron, a trucker sitting at the counter, hunched over a plate of eggs. Jack took a sip of coffee. "Long night?" the waitress asked. He nodded. "Saw something weird on the road." The trucker turned his head slightly. "Hitchhiker?" Jack froze. "Yeah, you've seen him." The man's fingers tightened around his fork. "Everyone out here has seen him." The waitress set the coffee pot down. "But you made it here," she said quietly. "That's good." Jack frowned. "Why wouldn't I?" The trucker looked at him. "Because most don't." The story spilled out in hushed tones. The hitchhiker wasn't just a man. He wasn't even alive. Truckers called him Midnight. Some swore he was the ghost of a long-dead driver. Others said he was something older, something that had always been out there, waiting on the roadside. One thing was certain: if you stopped for him, you never made it to your destination. Jack exhaled slowly. "So what happens now?" The trucker shrugged. "You drove past. That's good. But you saw him more than once. That's not so good." Jack shook his head. "I'm finishing my route. I don't believe in ghost stories." The trucker didn't argue. He just gave Jack a long, knowing look and returned to his eggs. Back on the road, Jack kept his eyes forward. His grip on the wheel was tighter than before. The diner's neon glow faded behind him. An hour passed, then another. At 2:13 a.m., his radio crackled. Static at first, then a voice. "You should have stopped." Jack's blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the empty passenger seat. He didn't dare look. He just pressed harder on the gas. The truck roared down the empty highway. But no matter how fast he went, he couldn't outrun the whispering voice beside him. "Miles to midnight, Jack." Jack clenched his teeth. "I don't believe in ghost stories." "You will." And then, laughter. Low, rasping, endless laughter, filling the cab, filling his skull. The last thing Jack saw before the world went dark was the hitchhiker's reflection in the windshield, grinning back at him. 2 days later, another trucker passed the same stretch of road and saw an abandoned 18-wheeler on the shoulder. Engine running, headlights on, but no sign of the driver. Only a lone figure standing beside the truck, slowly raising a hand. Waiting. Always waiting. Jack Delaney had been a trucker for nearly 30 years. He'd seen every kind of highway oddity you could imagine. Cars flipped over in ditches, wrecks that made no sense, animals too mangled to be from any normal accident. But nothing had ever made him feel real fear. Until tonight. His latest job was a long haul from Houston to Denver, hauling a refrigerated trailer full of something that didn't concern him. The dispatcher at Summit Freight had been vague, only saying it was sensitive cargo. As long as his paycheck cleared, he didn't care. The highway stretched out ahead of him in a black ribbon, the only illumination coming from his rig's high beams. No other cars, no streetlights, just the hum of his engine and the occasional whisper of wind against the cab. Then the radio crackled. Static at first, then a voice. "Breaker 19, you out there, big buddy?" Jack frowned. He hadn't heard another trucker in hours. He picked up the CB mic. "Yeah, go ahead. You on Route 285 heading north?" Jack's stomach tightened. How the hell did they know that? "Who's asking?" he said, glancing at his mirrors. Silence. Then, just before he was about to turn the radio off, "You're not alone out there, Delaney." Jack slammed the mic down. Who the hell was that? The CB was supposed to be private. He didn't like the way his name had rolled out of that stranger's mouth, like they had been waiting for him. He pushed the thought away and focused on the road. That's when he saw the first shadow. It was standing on the shoulder of the road, just inside the edge of his high beams. At first, it looked like a person. A hitchhiker, maybe. But as Jack's truck roared past, something was wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Jack's skin prickled. He checked the rearview mirror. The road behind him was empty. No one there. He exhaled. Just tired. He'd been running too many long shifts. It was getting to his head. But then, a few miles later, another figure, standing in the exact same place. Same posture. Same eerie stillness. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. No way. He pressed harder on the gas, the rig groaning as it picked up speed. The radio was dead silent now, but he could feel something pressing against the edges of his awareness. Watching. Waiting. He told himself it was just fatigue, just a trick of the mind, until he saw the third one. This time, it was standing directly in the middle of the road. Jack swerved. The rig skidded, tires shrieking against the pavement. The thing in the road didn't move. And then, it was gone. Vanished. His truck came to a lurching stop on the shoulder. Jack sat there, heart hammering, breath coming in ragged gasps. His hands were slick with sweat. He forced himself to check the mirrors. Nothing. The road was empty again. But the air inside the cab felt different. Thicker. Heavier. Jack reached for the CB radio. His fingers trembled as he pressed the button. "Anyone out there? I think I just..." A burst of static cut him off. Then that voice again. "Told you, Delaney. You're not alone." Jack's stomach nodded. That voice wasn't coming from the CB anymore. It was coming from the passenger seat. Jack didn't look. Every survival instinct in his body screamed at him. Do not look. Instead, he gripped the wheel and slammed the truck into gear. The engine roared, and the rig shot forward, tires spitting gravel as he tore down the highway. The presence beside him didn't move. But he could feel it. A cold, heavy pressure like something old and hungry. Then came the smell. Like rotting meat. Jack gagged, one hand flying up to cover his nose. His stomach twisted. It was coming from the trailer. What the hell was he hauling? He flicked on the interior trailer camera and saw something that should not be possible. The crates, sealed, locked, secure, were moving. Something inside them was pushing, bulging against the metal. The lock strained. The bolts groaned. Something was alive in there. And it wanted out. Jack didn't know what he was carrying. But he damn sure knew he didn't want to find out. He grabbed his phone to call his dispatcher. Summit Freight had some explaining to do. But the signal was dead. Figures. The thing in the trailer slammed against the walls. The entire rig shook. Jack white-knuckled the wheel. If that thing broke loose, he was dead. Up ahead, a set of headlights appeared. Another truck. Finally, Jack flashed his brights. The other truck did the same. Relief washed over him, until the radio crackled back to life. "Jack, buddy, you need to pull over." Jack frowned. "What? That's not a truck ahead of you." Jack's breath caught. He looked again, and his blood turned to ice. The headlights weren't attached to anything, just two floating orbs of light, and they were getting closer. The lights rushed at him. Jack yanked the wheel, sending the rig into a violent fishtail. The trailer groaned, the thing inside slamming against the walls. Then, impact. The world exploded in white-hot pain. The truck spun, metal shrieking, tires screaming. The windshield shattered. Jack was thrown forward, his head cracking against the dashboard. Silence. Darkness. Then, breathing. Not his own. Something big was standing outside the wreckage. Watching, waiting, a voice, low and wrong, whispered in his ear. "You finally stopped, Delaney." 2 days later, another trucker, name unknown, was assigned a last-minute job. A refrigerated trailer. Sensitive cargo. No questions asked. Just stay on the road. And don't stop.